Iran goes unchecked for the next months or years, that there will not be a catastrophe from them having nuclear capability.
No, you can't negotiate with them because their whole currency is lying, and their ideologue are fanatic ideologues, and they believe that they have a supernatural view of what's going to happen, and they're on the right side of cosmic divinity and all of these ideas. They've said that Israel, I think Rafsanjani, in a disputed statement, but I think it was accurate, said that Israel was a one-bomb state, and that was the advantage, that you got half the Jews in the world in one place where all you needed was one bomb. So you can't negotiate. I think their strategy, to tell you, was kind of a Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope, where they were going to ride it out, and then Trump would be gone in 3 years, and people would be angry, and you'd get a Joe Biden, or better yet, type of puppet of the left, but better yet, you would get an AOC or a squad member or Newsom or Harris, and then you're home free to get the bomb, because they would not do anything. That was the strategy, and I think it would have worked, actually, if Trump had let him off the hook. So now the question is, the domestic support. When the statue fell in April of 2003, I think most polls showed that George Bush had a popularity rating of between 80 and 90%. There was a controversy over the carrier flag, mission accomplished, because there was a little bit of terrorist activity. But I was in Washington at the Naval Academy, and I remember distinctly that Chris Matthews, I was watching CNN, who ended up despising Bush, was a big critic. He said, "We're all neocons now," on the air. And then I remember Andrew Sullivan, who was sort of a chameleon in his political views, but mostly started out as, I guess, a British conservative, but ended up very left-wing. He was all for it. There was a guy who did Little Green Footballs. Remember that little podcast? I knew the guy. He was a nice guy. I rode a bike with him once, and he was all in. And then all of a sudden, the insurgency came, and the American casualties started, and everybody adopted. And then there was a Vanity Fair on the neocons that they felt had been the architects: Richard Pearl, David Frum, Bill Kristol, and all of them had adopted, I guess you would call it, my beautiful war and your lousy occupation. And the scapegoat they focused on was Don Rumsfeld. If you just get rid of Don Rumsfeld, everything will be okay. So but what I'm saying is that the domestic support will depend on, A, how many American casualties, how quick is it over, and how effective are the results. If it is over within 3 weeks and there's a revolution and they have some type of transitional government, unlike Iraq, then everybody's going to say, I was for it all along, even the ones that are against it. If, on the other hand, they start shooting down planes, or they hit an American base, or they take out a frigate or something, they get a lucky shot on a carrier, and we don't get a change and we stop, then everybody said I was never for it. That's the way people react. And the base is going to be very tricky, because the MAGA base, remember, it was predicated on no forever wars and no optional wars in the Middle East in reaction to Afghanistan and Iraq. And already Tucker Carlson, as you pointed out, I think in an email to me, has already said that Donald Trump's war was evil. And he crossed the Rubicon, because remember, during the Dominion voting controversy right after January 6th, when Dominion forced the Fox Corporation to settle for hundreds of millions of dollars, and they had the interrogatories and the messages. One reason I think they wanted to settle, because those discovery phase of that lawsuit was going to show a lot of internal communication and outtakes and stuff. But Tucker, do you remember, he was there and he said, I really hate Donald Trump, and I hate him, and his first, if you think about it, I'm trying to remember, but I think I'm pretty accurate, his first this administration has nothing they can show. So he was a diehard critic, and then he came back into the fold, and he was credited with, along with Don Jr., to get J.D. Vance, who he felt was a kindred spirit, kind of neo-isolationist, and his son Buckley went to work for him, and that was sort of the veneer of the MAGA base. And then there were people like Candace and the Fringe and Fuentes and etc. But he's already come out against it now and said it's evil. So he's basically saying Donald Trump is evil. And this comes on the heels of Candace Owens coming out with a documentary about Charlie Kirk's wife, Bride of Charlie or something.
Yeah, like the Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah. So I think that fringe, those people are isolating themselves from the Trump movement, if I could say that.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's going to get a lot of popular right-wing opposition. He'll get opposition no matter what happens, from AOC, the Squad, Jasmine Crockett, all the candidates that are running for office. They think that, and you'll have Fetterman. I think he's already said that he thought this was a good idea. You'll see a guy like him or Mark Penn, a reasonable Democrat, understand why it's. Ben Rhodes is already saying, that this is a disaster. This is the guy who was the architect of the disastrous Iran deal.
Well, we were going to be slaughtered because of the death of Soleimani, right?
Yes. So we'll see. Again, I think the base will stay with him. I think independents will stay if it's successful. And I think the Democrats are in a holding pattern, and they're hoping. I'm not saying that out of maliciousness. I think they actually hope that it won't work, even though that would put American lives at risk. Because from what I can read today, and again, I'm speaking on Saturday, what they're posting, it's not just that it was a mistake, but it's wrong, it's evil. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, if it's evil, then you want it to stop, and then you want to destroy evil. But if you think the Americans, I don't know what Tucker means when he says it's evil, if there's Americans in the way of fire. If you believe it was an evil decision in the sense of wrong, then you might say, I disagree with the decision, but now that it's made, I want Americans to prevail and be safe. Donald Trump rages and screams, and then we look at what actually happens. So they wanted a closed border. They thought it lowered their wages. So this guy comes along. He could have been a Democrat or Republican. Trump had been both. Now think about the law firms. I'll give you an example. Where did that come from? That came from after January 6th, Fannie Willis on the direction, after all, Nathan Wade met on November 18th with White House counsel the same day Jack Smith was appointed special counsel, the same day that Michael Colangelo stepped down from the third spot at the DOJ after coming in from Letitia James's prosecution to go back to Alvin Bragg's, all 3 days after Donald Trump on November 15th of 2022 announced his reelection campaign. So there was a coordination there, but what did they do? I mean, they went after almost every lawyer that had anything to do with Donald Trump. So there was a colleague of mine, just to take one example, on the Bradley board, Cleta Mitchell, conservative, well-known lawyer, big law firm, very well compensated, very effective. Her expertise was not in politics, it was on 401(c)(3)s. What happens? She's down in Georgia. Donald Trump calls. He did not say to the registrar of Georgia, get me votes. He said, I know they're out there, find them, 10,000. Well, I've talked to a lot of candidates, and I said, when you have a close race, you ever call up? Yeah, we call up all the time. We say, you're not counting this district. Can you recount? Everybody does it. Anybody who was on that phone call, they hounded. They either tried to indict them, or more importantly, they pressured their law firm. So she came back, and the first thing she knew, she was fired from her law firm. They didn't do it crudely like Donald Trump did. They did it they used a stiletto, not an axe. And then more importantly, then, of course, the January 6th congressional committee met, and you knew what that was going to be like. They were going to subpoena these people. And when it was all said and done, she was unemployed at 73 years old, and she owed $250,000. And that was repeated again and again. And that was sort of a simile for what happened. So you can look at this two different directions. The way I interpret it, Donald Trump came along, and they felt that he was an existential threat to the bipartisan, not in a conspiratorial fashion, but to the bipartisan post-war consensus domestically. And they felt that he was also crude enough that he would be buffoonish if they went after him. So what did that happen? From the very get-go, Hillary Clinton broke the law by hiring a foreign national in a federal campaign. She hid it through the DNC, the Perkins-Coie, and Fusion GPS, and then he concocted this silly dossier that was completely bankrupt. James Comey hired him as a contractor, and we're off to the races. Barack Obama says, I want this even after the election to be used. They say there's nothing there. Our subordinates can't find it. Go ahead and do it, blah, blah, blah. Carter Page, FISA, and you get to this surreal situation where finally Rob Rosenstein and Andrew McCabe are wearing a wire to try to entrap Donald Trump. Or you have this Yale psychiatrist, Bandy Lee, who says that she thinks he's a 25th Amendment idiot and the Congress is listening to him and they want to, see if he can be removed. And then this just never stopped. And let's just take people who are in the news today, just randomly. James Comey, 245 times he said he couldn't remember under oath. If you or I did that, we'd be in jail. John Bolton, he's angry because Donald Trump doesn't like his interventionist policy, fires him. He wants to write a tell-all book, allegedly takes notes, sends it to his wife and daughter, and the book is going to be timed for what purposes? To come out during the campaign. A federal judge on an injunction says, I can't stop it, it's too late. But you are sacrificing national security and you're going to be exposed to civil and criminal liability at some point if you keep doing this. Doesn't matter. So Andrew McCabe lies 4 times at oath, interim FBI, nothing. Just like Bolton, the Biden administration, nothing. And then we get Comey, nothing. John Brennan lies twice under oath to a congressional committee, nothing. James Clapper lies under oath, nothing. You have all of that. So then your question is, when he comes in and we see what Letita James and Alvin Bragg, and there was the E. Jean Carroll and Jack Smith who surveilled, all of this stuff was coordinated. Well, then what is the real transgression? That you know that these prior people had committed perjury, allegedly, or they had broken the law in a variety of ways, and you just let it go? And which is the greater transgression? Trying to enforce the law retroactively with a political purpose as an addition, or using a political purpose not to enforce the law? Because if Biden had not been president, I think these people would have all been charged with perjury. And they weren't. And so now some of them, and then when you start looking at the judges and the juries and where they were charged, where they were indicted, there's another factor. For Donald Trump, I think you're right, he wants retribution and revenge. But for him to reify that, it's very different than the people who went after him. He's going to have to work in the Washington-New York corridor. And he's already got, I don't know how he did, get a grand jury of disinterested citizens to indict Bolton. I don't know how they did it, and to indict Comey. But he's going to have to do that with all of them. And then he's going to have to go before a Judge Merchan, a Judge Engoron, a Judge Kaplan, and they're going to be mostly East Coast liberal judges. So the bar for him to do anything is going to be much higher than to get him on 91 indictments, because they knew that they were going to be operating in atmospheres where there were liberal juries, liberal judges, liberal prosecutors, and liberal media. And so I think you're right that worries. I would have just dropped it, but there's part of me that also says, and you drop it, and then James Comey and Clapper and McCabe and Brennan and Bolton think they can break the law with impunity because of a higher moral standard to get Donald Trump. And then that's the legal thing. And then you have on the periphery, did Donald Trump ever order anybody to go after Barack Obama when he had a kind of a minor disagreement with the archives? Did he ever go after Hillary Clinton when she was clearly guilty of a felony by using an unsecure server to transmit, I think, 35 classified files? No. Did he go after Joe Biden? No. They went after him. They not only went after him, they took 14,000 files out of his home, and they found, 102 classified? They tried to take him off the ballot in 25 states. That didn't succeed either. 91 indictments. So what I'm getting at is, in the great cycle of things, what they did to him was overwhelming. And what he crudely and against this whole liberal jury is going to try to do to him, I'm not talking about his intent. I agree with you. He's furious at what they did to him. But that doesn't mean that these people weren't culpable. And it doesn't mean they were given exemptions and impunities because of their ideology and their devil's bargain with the Biden and Obama people, that they were going to go after Trump, and therefore they needed space to operate in. And so, yeah, I wish he wouldn't do it, but I also know another thing, that he's transparent about it. He's transparent in a counterproductive fashion. When they say, What do you think about John Bolton? An Obama or Clinton or Hillary, Biden would have done, even Biden would have said, no comment. I cannot talk about this. And then he would have said to his aide, how are we doing in getting this son of a bitch? How are we doing? What does Trump do? He goes, oh, he's a bad man. He's a bad man. And then headlines, Trump prejudices the indictment, already convicts. So yeah, he shouldn't do that, but what he is sort of an anecdote. And that's why people, when you look at, the thing about I'll finish, when you look at the classified documents. So they go after Trump, they had debanked him earlier, and they go into Barron and First Lady's underwear drawer, they come there. They're so intent to find something, they bring little stickers, classified. They go through the 14,000 documents, they take them out, they spread them on the ground, which they weren't spread. They put little stickers on them and take pictures that this was the sloppy way it was all set up. And then you look at the media, and that says, unlike Joe Biden, who notified authorities on his own volition. No, he didn't. He only notified Merrick Garland that he had culpability because somebody said to him, my God, you picked a special counsel to go after Trump. Have you had any exposure? He said, yeah. For 30 years, I took out classified documents, and it wasn't in one place. I had them in 4 places, and they were a hell of a lot less secure than Mar-a-Lago. And then he was advised, well, you better come forward, and then the media will go from there. So he went forward, and they said, Joe Biden, unlike Donald Trump, volunteered. He didn't. He was smart. And then he tells Robert Hur. Robert Hur goes through all the evidence, and he says, this man is culpable. And then he comes up with this ridiculous exegesis. He says, but he's so non compos mentis that no jury would convict him. They'd feel empathy for him. And you think, so he's not fit to stand trial, but he's fit to run the United States? And then finally, the dessert of the whole thing is he talks to his speechwriter who has no classified clearance, and he admits that he has been talking and using these files to transmit classified information, and the speechwriter knows it, and then they subpoena the tapes, and he destroys them. And he says, oh, I destroyed them under subpoena because I felt somebody might hack them. They were downloaded, and then Robert Hur says, okay, you didn't charge him with anything. So there was an asymmetry with 2 different things were going on. And that really bothered me. And believe me, I can tell you that I've had this conversation with people at Stanford Law School, people at the Hoover Institution, people on interviews, and they can see Donald Trump's crudeness, but they cannot see how subtle and sophisticated and establishment were the efforts to sort of make him into a buffoon.